Good evening. This is Steve Maher. I call this meeting to order on 7:04. And at first, I'd like to have Patrick, if you do the flag salute, please.
With pleasure. Ready and pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This special board meeting for Thursday, June 18th, 2020 will be conducted completely online. The Governor's Executive Order N-25-20 relaxes the Brown Act requirements for holding public meetings via teleconference. This meeting will be recorded and televised. Members of the public may attend via the public viewing link provided below. Public viewing link will be provided via TV 28 on cable TV or by streaming from TV 28. Note, updated public comment changes due to COVID-19. Per normal practice, the meeting will be live streamed and available at www.tv30.org for viewing and also broadcast live on Comcast TV, channel 28, beginning at 7 p.m. Online speaker slips will be available, and the public will be able to call in using a computer or smartphone via a link which we provided following submission of a speaker slip. A telephonic option will also be available. Once connected, the public speaker will be placed in an online waiting room. While in the waiting room, the public speaker should watch or listen to the meeting via the outlets above, as they will not see or hear the meeting while they are connected and waiting to speak. When the agenda item upon which the individual would like to comment is addressed, the speaker will be announced in the meeting as to when it is his or her time to speak to the school board of trustees. The speaker will then be moved to the meeting for comment. TV 30 is allowing only audio at this time, adding a full screen public comment when the speaker is talking. And the yellow comment forms are for only items on this agenda only. Individual speakers shall be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board on this item for the sake of time. And we have closed captioning now. In an effort to make our board meetings more accessible to our community, we wanted to share new processes for assessing closed captioning and providing input through public comment. Visit the board agenda you would like to assess closed captioning for, link to all agenda postings. Fill out the closed captioning request form, link to form. We will follow up via email with a link access to the board meeting via Zoom. Ensure that you have the most current version of Zoom installed on your computer or mobile device. Click on the Zoom meeting link prior to the start of the meeting. Please use your full name when entering. You will be initially be placed in a waiting room. Once you have been admitted into the meeting, you will be able to view the meeting with closed caption by clicking on the CC button on the bottom of your Zoom window. Please use this option only if you require closed captioning. At this time, is David back yet?
No.
Okay, then I would like to introduce Ahmed Chicoslaslami, our Assistant Superintendent. Ahmed?
Great, thank you. Are we going to introduce the other assistant superintendents, or do you want me to take it from here?
Well, we could, yes. Are they all here?
I believe they are.
Okay, we have certainly Ahmed Chicosalami, Head of Business Services, Assistant Superintendent. Assistant Superintendent Julio Hernandez, Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources. Assistant Superintendent Ed Dialazo, Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. Assistant Superintendent Dr. Woodward of Teaching and Learning. We have our board members, Trustee Miller, Trustee Larson, Trustee Arkin, Trustee Yee, and Board President Trustee Maher. And Roseanne Pryor, our board secretary, is here, and Dave will be joining us shortly. So you're on.
Great, thank you very much. And I just saw our superintendent, Haglund, join us.
Good. Dave, would you like to say any words before we start?
No, just thank you to everyone for being here and participating. I apologize for being a bit late. We have some health issues with my dad down here, and if I have to jump off again, I will unfortunately have to do that, but I appreciate your understanding.
Yeah, take care of your family.
I appreciate it.
Great, thank you,
So
David.
Ahmed, you're on.
Great, thank you. Good evening, board members, cabinet, staff, and community. I'm going to share my screen and pull up the presentation.
And Ahmed, as you go to your screen, I will remind everybody that at the conclusion of your presentation, there'll be board comments or questions, and then there will be public comment, and then back to board comments or questions.
Great, thank you. So my screen should be up, and I'm going to kind of go through and run through the summary of our presentation. We'll do some background. I know there's new individuals that may be joining us for this meeting, so I'll run through some of the information that we have presented in the past, but there is within that information new data that I'd like to present and review with the board and community. And then we'll kind of do a deeper dive and a refinement and discussion on the reduction options and the work that staff has done since our last meeting last week. And so that is also important to go through that and then to get the feedback from the board and further directions. Just as a reminder, Pleasanton Unified School District is a locally controlled funded formula school, which means that we receive our funding through a formula the state has developed on a per student, depending on the grade levels. There is supplemental and concentration grants that are provided for specific students that we refer to them as in a broad category of unduplicated. Those are English learners, foster youth, free and reduced, and so on. The Pleasanton Unified has about 17% of supplemental students that we receive those grants for. The district also receives other state funding as part of the LCFF, and together the LCFF and other state funding provide 90% of our funding. The state's minimum level are not exceeded by our local property tax. Our property tax base is strong in Pleasanton. However, it's about 54% of the total in the LCFF formula. So we rely heavily on the state for the remaining funds. In addition, the district receives from the state through the SELPA special education funding, additional federal funds, and local grants through generous donations from PPIE and PTA boosters and other groups. We don't have a partial tax in Pleasanton, and so that is another source of local funding that schools receive. There are schools in the state of California, about 100 school districts, that have what they call community funded, and their local property tax exceeds that state formula, and they are able to retain those additional property tax dollars. We've had 2 study sessions, and this is our 3rd study session on this topic. And in these study sessions, we have reviewed the budget, the state budget, and the financial impacts to our school district in May. I think it was May 15th, and it's just mind-boggling how time collapses during this period. But it was not too long ago the governor revealed his budget based on the impacts from the coronavirus pandemic and the loss of about $54 billion in both revenues and increased expenditures. The governor proposed significant reductions to K-12 education in terms of our formula, the LCFF formula, categorical programs, significant deferrals, and providing some relief in regards to pensions and new funding, and how the federal dollars could be divided up. However, that will result in approximately an $11.5 million impact to our revenues. And we discussed the differences between some of the differences between the legislature's approach and the governor's approach. And I'll talk about that a little further in a minute. And knowing that the governor and the potential worst case scenario of these reductions would be about that 11.5 million, staff started to develop potential reduction options. And we have been reviewing that in detail and discussing that with the board and various stakeholders in the last few weeks. So the new development this past week was that the legislature approved the 2021 budget. It's SB 74. And that budget is basically a no-cut budget, and which is trying to keep K-12 education whole through fully funding LCFF plus the 2.31% COLA. However, it does have a trigger on of large deferrals and other budget revisions to the state's budget if there's no additional federal funding to make the budget whole by September. The governor has indicated he is not going to be accepting this budget, so negotiations between the legislature and governor's office are ongoing. So one option would be that there is a negotiated settlement and then a budget that then the legislature will approve that the governor will sign. However, within the 12 days, the governor has to either approve the budget as presented, use his line item veto to make specific changes to the budget, which is somewhat limited, or he may veto the entire bill and send it back to the legislature. And so, we're expecting that there will be some movement and that we will have a final state enacted budget either in late June or early July. So based on that, we kind of see, two budget scenarios. One is the worst case and one is the legislature's budget that they have sent to the governor. And most likely the budget will land somewhere either in the middle, closer to the legislature or closer to the governor. We don't know. And for that reason, we need to be planning for what could be the worst case, knowing that there is going to be potentially a certain level of reductions. There's certainly going to be large deferrals that we have to plan for. And putting the district and doing the hard work up front right now in planning, making sure that we have contingency plans in place, puts the district in the best place once the final budget is approved to be able to make prudent, timely decisions in early July to ensure the district's financial stability and solvency. So in terms of process, we are following the common message, which is a recommendation put together by the county, by the Alameda County Office of Education and other state officials who put together the common message. And so that is the building block for our budget. And we're incorporating the level of reductions needed to receive an approved budget from the county office, knowing that only the reductions that are necessary will be made. And so it is our obligation, our responsibility to submit that to the county by the end of June. And so we have a June 25th regular board meeting at which time the budget will be approved. Then we have, if the state budget, which we anticipate the final state budget will have significant changes, then we will prepare what is called a 45-day budget revision. And we'll only implement the needed reductions. And some of our reductions that we're going to review do require negotiations with our union members, both APT and CSEA. So we've been looking at this chart in the past meetings, and this is basically a review of what we looked at in the second interim. We do 2 budget updates during the fiscal year, and the second interim was updated in March. At that time, we were anticipating a fiscal year that would have about a net operating deficit of about 10.6 million. And we realized that in the out years, we would have to reduce that operating deficit. And so we had a planned deficit spending reduction in the out years to maintain our financial solvency. However, the current fiscal conditions really exacerbates that plan. So that's one thing that we've been discussing and sharing. The new information is in the red box, and this is called the estimated actuals. And the estimated actuals is we're looking at our books as we're heading down to closing them at the end of this month. And we've realized some additional revenues in terms of, some local donations around the PTA or other organizations during that fourth quarter. We've also, had to update our states on behalf STRS calculations in terms of some of those state revenues. And so we do see a slight increase in state total revenues for the district. However, we have a corresponding increases in expenditure. And we've also realized some savings in expenditure relating to less staff time and overtime and other things in this fourth quarter. So there's a net operating deficit reduction from the second interim of close to $1 million. And so that's slightly improved our reserve levels and slightly improved the total percentage of reserves, which will help us in next year's additional cost and out year expenses as well. Going through the building blocks of our budget assumptions, there's a lot of detailed information here. This is the LCFF formula in a nutshell, and some of the effective deficit factor that the governor has built into his model. And these are the other funds the district receives through block grants and lottery assumptions. The key assumptions for us was that in building our budget, we had to make an additional $11 million reductions. We've adopted all of the assumptions in the common message, except for slight adjustments to COLA in the out year. We've kept the ADA flat. We have not yet incorporated the CARES funding, and there is significant dollars associated with that, but due to the not being clear in terms of our ability of what those funds could be spent on, and some differences of opinion between the legislature and the governor, we've yet to place that into our funding model. We've taken advantage of the PERS and STRS relief. The PPI donations are at current levels, and made adjustments to staffing and salary increases based on our agreements with our unions as well. The couple of key adjustments that I did want to highlight that we discussed was we knew we were going to be looking at increased costs related to COVID-19, both in additional cleaning, custodial, potentially distant learning software, and other startup costs related to the impacts of COVID-19. And so we have placed about a $500,000 placeholder in the general fund for those anticipated costs. In addition, we expect to receive about $236,000 of additional federal assistance that are geared to COVID-19, providing us about $750,000 for the additional costs that we're going to be incurred related to COVID-19. Today, we found out from the Alameda County Office of Education that we would be receiving from the state our allotment of PPE items, and that includes both cloth masks for staff and cloth masks for students, and in addition to face shields for our teaching staff. And so we will take delivery of that and hopefully have it ready for the start of school. So we were actually pleased that the state was providing us what they're calling, I believe, a 60-day supply of those PPE items. In addition, we indicated that there would be some savings from the fourth quarter in terms of the distance learning model that and the end of school. And so those estimated actuals indicate that there will be about $1 million of unrestricted and non-carryover funds that will be available to help us with some of the COVID-19 costs and reducing our deficit spending. Those funds are one-time in nature. What we yet haven't factored in here, and there may be savings and there may be some additional costs, is some of the educational model and how that would actually financially have a savings for us. So that's something we're monitoring. We're not counting on those savings because they're going to be hard to realize, but we do know that there is a potential of that depending on the model. The next slide has new information, and I've outlined it in the box in red in terms of the proposed budget. So we've now built into the proposed budget the $11 million of reductions and other assumptions I indicated, including adding into there the costs related to COVID-19 and some of the savings in the carryover. So we do show that there will be deficit spending, planned deficit spending next year of about $6 million. However, our general fund reserves will allow us to absorb some of that, leaving about 4.33% for next year. And then going into 21-22, our revenues remain pretty flat while our expenditures will continue to grow. The third year, it grows a little bit larger because the relief in STRS and PERS falls off. And so in order to make the budget meet that 3% requirement, the county office is allowing us to put a reduction plug in the out year. So while this year's reductions require us to have an itemized plan for it, the out year potential need of reductions are right now a placeholder to ensure that we'd be able to meet our minimum reserve levels. We're going to shift a little bit and talk about the reductions. And it's, as we have developed the reductions and the feedback that we've taken, we've really been referring back to this framework of evaluation and ensuring that we're learning from the past, that the priorities and reductions are aligned with our organizational goals, that we're looking at our students that are most vulnerable, that we're preserving the core academic programs, and where we are making reductions, that the program can come back if those funds become available. And also ensuring the safety and operational integrity and support services necessary to ensure the school district maintains its good standing. Throughout the process, we've been in this very short time, we have held 3 study sessions. We've reached out through the thought exchange to have input come in. We've engaged our associations through meetings and including them in many of our groups and committees that are looking at this. We've engaged and kept the district leadership abreast of the work. And most recently, we've had the Budget Advisory Council, which is a superintendent advisory committee, has had 2 meetings. This morning we held our 2nd meeting, and that committee is comprised of individuals within our community who have been integrally caring for our school district, either as previous staff members, as parents, as engaged parents, and community members who've supported us. So it's really a diverse group, as well as staff members who volunteer to help us in this process. So that committee and its work and its input to the superintendent will continue. So again, we're now going to start to dive a little deeper and go through the detailed proposals. So we've kind of identified 5 levers. The first lever is mostly a non-personnel, and it's things, people, it's books, supplies, materials, services in that sense. Savings through salary reductions does impact people, but not positions. So it looks at various short-term salary reductions, and we'll dive deeper in that. And then program staffing reductions and aligning staffing to enrollment, that does look at positions. However, in kind of developing the plan, we've looked at positions that are vacant, the positions that could be combined or reallocated responsibilities. So we are looking at that strategically. And item E is looking at revenue sources that could enhance us. And some of those revenue sources will take some time to develop and could be looked at more of a long-term plan. The solution would probably include a variety of these, some of them are difficult to make, but the survival and the financial solvency of the district, it hinges on us making those decisions. This slide is a familiar slide. Again, this is just to kind of orient us that we are a people-intensive organization, and that 85% of our cost is salaries and benefits, and approximately 15% are in supplies, materials, and operations. And some of those costs are fixed, such as insurance and mostly our utility bills. So we have gone through the list and done some refinement and updating of that. And so you'll see that in the details. This pie chart is a quick snapshot of the kind of how it's dispersed. And so we're looking at a pretty even disbursement in terms of the categories. However, again, to note that levers C and D do affect positions. Lever B affects salaries, and lever A affects things and materials. And then this last item there, again, we're hoping that will grow in the out years and allow the district to have greater control of its revenue sources. The other item I wanted to point out is that this total right now is about 12.83 million. And so we're targeting, for the planning purposes, 11 million, knowing that once the state finalizes its budget, clarifies its allocation of the CARES Act and other items, that our revenues will increase and that targeted reduction will hopefully come down. However, this, I think, gives the board a wide range of options, and that as we receive feedback, knowing some priorities will help us, because then the next work that we have to do is to kind of put it in a prioritization, so that once we know where we are, we can start to not make those reductions that are of higher priority to the board. This is just a quick graph that shows the distribution of our staff. Most of our staff are certificated and classified, and we do obviously have management, and the benefits and statutory are spread through all of these groups. So in terms of the changes, I'm going to kind of go through them line by line and then discuss where we've made those modifications. We do want to continue reducing conference attendances. We feel that with COVID-19, that's an area we could, professional developments can be done online, and less attendance in person, and reducing those costs. We've looked at the book adoptions around world language and pushing that out for additional 2 school fiscal years. So before we were looking at pushing it out 1 fiscal year. So in this model, we're looking at 2 fiscal years. No changes in looking at some of the music fund and stuff that we believe we could push out. The science consumables depends a little bit upon how we reopen. So that flexibility exists there depending on the reopening plans. Item number 5, we looked at how the bus supports our students who are in after-school intervention programs, specifically at Foothill. And we would like to keep that bus program to support those students. However, moving it to our LCAP dollars for supplemental, which is, while it's part of the general fund, it's restricted to our supplemental program. And so we can utilize the carryover that exists in there to continue funding that program. We're going to continue tightening up in terms of district office and department supplies and materials and contracted services. Item 7 is one that we have changed significantly. Before, we were looking at a modest 10% reduction in line with the LCFF formula, which would only provide about a $60,000 reduction. And in this one, we looked at carryover that the sites have, and they have, some sites have significant carryover or funds within their unrestricted site allocation. And so we looked at a model where we would true up anyone who is below the allocation level for 1920, and any school that is above that allocation level, they would maintain their funds. We wouldn't take any funds away for any school, but we would true up schools that are below that. In addition, just want to point out that we are not touching any restricted funds, and combined, the schools have about a $1.2 million on their restricted side as well. And so those are donations that have come in from our community for specific programs at those schools. And so those would remain. So that would allow about a $400,000 savings in for next year. And then we would revisit the issue in the following year and see, how much carryover was in the site budgets. Both the tech budget and the safety emergency also have built in reserves, because the tech budget plans on building up kind of its funds and then spending it down on updating devices for staff. And so we feel that for the next couple of years, we could tighten up and not contribute to that fund. In addition, same as for the emergency preparedness fund. Moving on to item B, we have made some changes here. The items that don't have dollar numbers are not ones that we are currently, staff is currently recommending. We are looking at, and in our Assistant Superintendent of HR has engaged in negotiations around furlough days. And furlough days are days that staff would not work, and they would not, for those days that they wouldn't get, for days they would not work, their pay would be adjusted accordingly. And so that is an item that we're looking at if the cuts go through. That is one that we're looking at for the 2021 fiscal year. We don't know what's going to happen in the out year, so that's why it's not there. And then the other items that we're looking at is negotiating changes to the agreements on the retirement incentive, the golden handshake, and also looking at items 16 and 17, which are discretionary stipends or overtime, and tightening those up and saving in those two categories. Moving on to lever C. Lever C is one of the largest levers, and it's on 2 sheets. We have modified item 18. We really looked at this in detail and believe the district needs additional professional development in 2021, and we want to be very targeted and structure that around PUSD's reopening plans. We are still looking at a reorganization of the graphic department and bringing it more to a 21st century model, which would focus their work more on digital storage and large print projects. We have deployed a fleet of copiers throughout our district now that have greater flexibility for staff to use at the sites. In addition, we have moved to a digital era where Google Classroom and Google platforms require less printing, and we believe that that this is sound financial planning for the district. I've moved item 20 to another one, so we'll address that at a later point. We've looked at our specialist and believe that there is some shifting around of responsibilities and reducing and repurposing our specialists and potentially being able to deliver our required education with a reduction in staff in those areas. Again, we'd like to relook at the library services K-12 and see how we can streamline and find savings in that area as well. We changed item number 23. We're no longer going to specifically target a specific dollar or a specific program for reductions. We're only going to utilize planning and making sure that if there's any program that can't, work with COVID-19, that we adjust that plan accordingly, and potentially there will be some savings in those, but those aren't dollars we're going to be counting on, but we realize that might be a potential. For items 24, 25, and 26, those remain unchanged. We believe that we're going to have to make some reductions in LCAP, and we could do that through less allocations to the sites. Potentially look at continuing summer school in the same model as the current year, except for extended summer year for our special needs students that we believe is best to be done on site. And then doing some reallocations in our CTE program and keeping some of the funds in the general fund. Currently, no reductions in the CTE program for the current fiscal year, but depending on the governor's budget, the out years may have to change on that program. Moving on to other restructuring efforts that we're looking at, we do want to evaluate the technology department and find efficiencies in utilizing basically remote support for our staff, and also looking at consolidation and deployment model as well. We have opportunities to restructure and reduce both district office and site management in both relocating and closing management positions. And so that those dollars would be captured back. We believe we can restructure and reduce both district and some site support staff, and those would be accomplished through closing opening positions and not needing any type of actual layoffs. We looked at custodial and grounds, and we felt that going into the COVID-19 situation and the need of making sure our grounds are safe and students are not injured, that wouldn't be an area that we could really have any savings, and that it could be actually costly to the district. We still feel that there can be some restructuring and closing of some open positions in fiscal and operations. So we still want to pursue that. In transportation, we actually are probably going to see an increased cost as we delved a little bit deeper into this. Our fleet is old, and even if we used more outside services to maintain our fleet, just the fact of taking and managing and someone actually going to the mechanics, there's considerable amount of legwork in that area. And in terms of special education, our costs will probably increase related to spacing requirements that will be needed for that program. So we really didn't see the opportunity to have savings in there. We talked about the PIO position is a management level position that is currently open, and we'd freeze that for the next year or two. And then we discussed the elimination of the roving subs, and that the substitutes, our regular substitutes, would handle our needs for regular sick situations. Moving on to lever D, there was quite a bit of work that was done in this lever, significant work by our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, working closely with our principals and with student services to look at enrollment at the elementary grades and seeing where we could make additional tightening of our staffing, but still maintaining the 1 to 24 in K3 and the 1 to 33 in 4-5. And then working with, again, our site administrators to identify both at the middle school and the high school sections that can be collapsed under extended day or vacant positions, and others that would align the needs with the enrollment. So again, those were significant work that was done last week and identified and clarity around those proposed wide range of reductions in those columns. And then item E is we looked a little bit further as to opportunities for utilizing revenue sources. So the district has a couple of federal programs that ended last year. However, we anticipate that the federal government is going to provide flexibility to use those carryovers. And we had a PBIS program and Every Student Succeeds carryover. So we're hoping we can get the okay from those federal programs to use those carryovers and in other areas meeting the same needs. Additionally, we added item 43B, which is looking at other one-time sources of funding from either property sales or our OPEB account to offset some of the potential reductions. Currently, to use the sale of properties is going to require state flexibility, which we may have. And so there are some properties the district can look at. The Upper Burnell Field is currently leased to the city, and we have the Neal property. The district has set aside funds in its OPEB account to be able to reduce its liabilities in the out year, and that could be also moved by board resolution. Staff isn't recommending to utilize those funds and those options at this moment. We look at that as really in a worst case situation. If financial situations don't get better, then there would be out year kind of options. The other issue is if we're looking at significant deferrals, the OPEB fund can be used to manage our cash flow issues. And if those funds weren't there, we would have significant problems. And it would also kind of increase our out year liabilities for OPEB and reduce our marketability and our financial standings. We talked about enhancing revenues, and those are still available, and we're still working at looking at Kids Club and other type of revenue enhancing programs. They're going to take some time to develop. We did look at the PSEE gift fund, and there is some flexibility within that fund, and we'd like to talk to PPIE about allowing us to utilize some of those, the grant monies for the current fiscal year. And then we discussed the options in the out years for property tax and increasing donations and other revenue generating programs. So those are still things that we like to work on, but they're not going to be immediate. So those are going to take some additional time. So in terms of the process, the next steps is to receive the feedback and the direction from board tonight. Tomorrow, Tom and I, and one of the things I want to say is Tom and both Kathy and the rest of the fiscal team have been, working really extremely hard to pull all this together. And when, we like things to be locked in and ready to go. And we have to talk about with Tom tomorrow to, put everything in place, run all the reports, and basically be ready to publish this budget on Monday, knowing that in most all likelihood, we're going to have to go back and again, change it up. So it's been really tough on the fiscal team. So we'll make those, take that feedback, make those revisions, and then bring the budget for approval on the 25th. Once we receive the update from the state, we'll then have to refine our reduction plan and probably schedule additional board meetings. And those will be necessary as they relate to some specific reductions as well. We do expect that we'll have to bring back a 45-day budget revision as well and implement the budget reductions that are necessary. So with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Board President Maher.
Okay, we can start questions, comments. Mark?
Yeah, so, okay, just first of all, a couple of comments. Number one, I believe this was an incredibly thoughtful process, and I think what you've come up with is very, very considerate and really well thought out. And so I just want to applaud you guys for doing that. I think you've involved a lot of people, a lot of constituents of all kinds, and you really not focused on one particular area, but you really have laid out a lot of different options and really looked good. This has been an interesting process to watch this evolve, and I'm really impressed. So some comments, I'll try to be quick. I'm not sure if $500,000 seems like enough to open schools. That one makes me a little concerned. I don't know what the number is, but I don't know. A little bit concerned around tech specialists and ability to handle the technology needs while we're doing this sort of blended distance and in-person learning stuff. And I'm hoping that you didn't really go into a lot of details on that. So just interested maybe in that one. Also on the library side, it's kind of a little vague as to what that would actually look like. Let's see. Those are my comments. Okay, so some questions. First question is, I haven't been involved as a board member when furloughs were implemented. How does that actually work?
Right, I'm going to defer to Assistant Superintendent Hernandez.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Maher, Board of Trustees, Cabinet, community. So the way the furlough days work is on a given day, labor is not rendered, meaning the employee does not come to work, and that pay for that day is also not given. So the way that we have proposed is that it be 3 days for the 2021 school year for only that year. And we are in the process of negotiating that right now with APT and CSEA.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, for a teacher to have a furlough day, I don't understand how that works if they still have to be in the classroom, or does that come on days that are not classroom teaching days? How does that?
That's a great question. What the district has proposed is days where it's a minimal impact to the students so that the students' attendance is not being impacted. These are days where student attendance is not, they're not in school, but it is a work day for teachers. So we propose furlough days that are minimal impact to students and families, but teachers are not expected to come to work. They're not expected to provide labor. And for that day, they are also not going to be paid. Again, the concept of the furlough day is not just limited to the teachers.
No, I know.
That's a shared ask with everyone else.
Yeah, I guess with the potential of the hybrid model, there may be more opportunities to do something like that with less potential impact. The next question, so you proposed $1.8 million over the $11 million, and I think you said that was to give us some flexibility in terms. We lost. We lost Ahmad. Anyway, I think that was to give us some flexibility, but is it more that we want to maybe be a little more conservative now in case things are worse, or, to preserve balance for future years, or. So are we really is that buffer, $1.8 million buffer down to $11 million, a real buffer, I guess?
So I'll answer that while we try to figure out what happened to Ahmad. So yes, the goal was to give the board some flexibility so that they could assert their will with some targeted reinstatement, so to speak, but also as the governor's budget appears and we get more familiar with what the hard numbers might look like, there may be additional ways for us to reduce that. And so all that's true, but we're still required to provide the budget by June 30th, even though all of the detail from the state budget won't be clear at that time, which is why the county office gave us the clarification to just identify the bucket, so to speak, of what you'll have to address, but you don't have to be specific about exactly how you'll get there yet.
But it is the intention of us to arrive at a number that's at that $11 million reduction by the time we deliver the budget at the end of the month.
Unless we get some news from the state beforehand,
okay.
Yeah, that would be the need.
Okay, sorry, going through this as fast as I can. Okay, golden handshake. So there are some people who are, in the retirement year or something like that, and it seems a little bit. I don't know how that reduction would work in a fair way, I guess is what I'm asking on that.
Well, with the, or Julio, do you want to take that, or I can?
Sure, you can go ahead, David. I could add if you like.
Okay, so with CSEA and APT, it's a negotiated issue. With management, it's not. And so we could move forward with the cut for the management team. Of course, honoring retirements that are currently in the system, but then not extending it beyond that. And with CSEA and APT, we would need to negotiate the walking back of that policy.
If I could just add, similar to furlough days, they cannot unilaterally be taken by the board. They have to be agreed upon by the associations. So that is a negotiated item. That said, the management's case, it's an AR, which does not require negotiation for that golden handshake.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little concerned about that one myself. Line 21. So that is a specialists line, which is like, I think, $1.4 million. And I think I asked it, or maybe somebody asked it before, give me some example of what these specialists are.
So we have a number of, I'll go ahead and take that if that's okay. Good evening, President Maher, members of the board, Superintendent Haglund, Cabinet and Community. So we have a number of specialists, and they include music, PE, science. We have integration, intervention specialists, all of those. So that's what that is. It's a broad category there.
Okay. So, but we're not talking about eliminating music programs necessarily, or art or sports or anything.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so then this feeds into my last question. Sorry, guys. So line 40 to 42 talks about some reductions, as well as the site specialists, which I assume in some cases may push back into teaching roles or something like that. And so in total with this, I'm going to call it package, how many layoffs are we actually anticipating?
If I could take that, David. So right now, it's unclear if we will be allowed to lay off during the summer. Still being negotiated with the governor and the legislature. There is a statute that would allow the district to have what it's called summer layoffs. Historically, that statute has been suspended. It may be suspended this time as well. We do not know. So I guess a quick answer to the question, we do not know we will be able to lay off personnel this summer. That said, that would just mean that we will not be able to reduce that total amount of about 12 million or 11 million, which may result in more number of FTEs being laid off for 2021 that will impact the 21-22 school year. Hence why we are proposing furlough days or other non-layoff or non-release of personnel to attempt to minimize that potential of laying people off.
Okay, so thank you. So what we're saying is the proposal that is here is dependent on the ability to reduce headcount through layoffs, and if not, then we would have to find other ways.
So to clarify, there are unfilled positions that we could potentially not fill. There is also temporary employees, probationary 2 employees. There are other ways of achieving that.
Okay.
Again, among others, such as furlough days, such as reduction and or suspending the textbook accounts. So that is a possibility, yes.
Yeah, I'm just really specifically referring to lines 21 and then 40 to 42 as to kind of how do we achieve that if we don't have that capability. So that's, anyway, that's it for me.
Hey, Joan?
I had many of the same questions Mark had. Thanks, Mark, for asking them. So specifically, I'll start at the bottom, I guess, really the 41 and 42. When we're talking about extended day sections, are you talking about the ability to take, like, for example, in middle school for students to be able to take a period because they've got, you know, one of the languages in their wheel? Or are you talking about the extended day interventions that we've been providing? What is 41 and 42 actually
Great question. Great question.
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. So there's a concept called 6/5. That is when a teacher is working a full load, but they sell their prep period. So that is what we're calling the extended day. Because of the different periods within our school district, we often refer to it as 6/5. If there's a 7-period day, it would be 8/7. So that is the definition of what extended day is. It's not about the courses. It's not about the student's ability, although that extra section is given to the teacher beyond their normal full load, beyond their normal capacity. There are some teachers who not only have sell their period, but also have an additional course on top of that. So we've identified those as normally 6/5, although depending on the school, maybe 8/7, an additional period.
Julio, who would teach that class if they don't?
So it depends. There is what we're trying to norm classes. In other words, there were classes that had 6 students, classes that were definitely very low in number. There were also what they call testing periods. There were also periods that were given to support the teachers that may have not had students in there. So we requested that the principals look at those sections and true them up so that we did not violate the CBA, but then also allowed those sections to be removed from the budget.
So we're not necessarily talking about sections that are like a program section, like this is jazz band, for example, in middle school.
Absolutely correct.
Pardon?
That's absolutely correct. So we intentionally did not look at jazz or music or Project Lead the Way or any of those programs.
Okay.
These extra periods that teachers, again, because of the master, were assigned, but we also looked at the masters where there were classes with very low numbers. So we asked that those enrollment projection numbers be trued up so that we were able to release those 6/5 or 7/8 sections off of the budget.
So I think that's a great thing to do. It will make the master schedule more challenging for the principals in the middle and high school, but this is better than laying off, people. So that also means that there will probably be choices that affect students such that they wouldn't be able to take this class because that class is full and we wouldn't be able to add an extra section, for example. So there will be some impacts to that. But I like the idea of that. That's, again, a better way than cutting a whole program or laying off, a slew of folks who we don't want to do that. So thank you for that. And I'd like to go also back to 21, because for me, I have a lot of questions about 21. So when we're talking about, and this doesn't have an asterisk by the way, so you're saying it's not negotiable, but those specialists actually are covering an extra prep period that our 4th and 5th grade elementary teachers have, right? So what would we be doing with this? How would that work if we suddenly said, okay, we're not going to have the specialists cover the students for those periods? How would we handle that?
So in the 18-19 school year, you're correct, Trustee Larson, our CBA did not allow us to do this. In the 18-19 school year, the CBA stated, particularly in the PE classes, that only one PE teacher could teach only one class. So a PE teacher could only be assigned one class to instruct PE. In negotiations we just had, we removed that language from the contract, which allows that specialist, that PE teacher, to be able to take 2 classes. So in fact, we are not reducing prep periods. We will need to redesign the master, but students will not be impacted in relation to the instruction, but it's going to take some creative master building. It also may allow maybe teachers to take their prep period at the end of the day or some other time, but we're not impacting students or the program because the contract now allows us to double up.
Yeah, I remember that. I just really wanted to talk about it. I will say it does impact students to have, twice the students in a PE or a music class. But again, I like this not doing away with an entire program because we're forced to make these budget cuts. Whereas this is, an accommodation that can still keep kids getting the actual PE curriculum instruction and also be able to get the music instruction that we pretty much value. So I appreciate that. I like that. In terms of the other specialists, in particular, we talked last time about moving to, twofold. We talked, there's the intervention specialists, the integration specialists, I think we're calling them now. And there's also the specialists that we have that, are really working with our teachers and our staff. And as we move into this new potentially blended or, all online aspect of the new school year, I get concerned with the idea that we are considering not having those professional resources to help us design those programs and provide the PD to our teachers. So can you talk to me a little bit about what else is planned in these 14 FTE?
Sure.
And would we be losing that level of resources?
So I believe Mr. Shiko Salami spoke about restricted funds in LCAP and then our general funds. So what we're attempting to protect is our general fund. So to the extent that we could move generally funded specialists, such as the integration specialists and these specialists that have been key to developing the curriculum for our distance learning. And again, I don't foresee that diminishing. I see that increasing. There may be a shifting, although as Mr. Shiko Salami said, it's all one big pot. But moving it from restricted to LCAP funds that would allow us to support those specialists is a plan that we are addressing now. I think Dr. Woodward could speak a little bit more about the need for these specialists and the intent in the future.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to, Julio. Thank you. I want to just reiterate that this is not ideal in any situation needing to cut these funds. And we highly value the resources that are able to bring these additional programs to our students. Having said that, we must also be mindful of the possibility that we may have to toggle between distance learning full-time to hybrid learning with the possibility of full-time being in school. And so given that we're already adjusting our model, and we do know that there would be the need to provide enrichment and intervention for our students, so we're not underestimating that. As well, we realize that the need to increase professional development for our teachers is vast and huge. So when we look at potentially redistributing positions to a different funding source, we do need to keep in mind that the supplemental concentration is intended for certain student groups, our unduplicated students. So if things were to be repositioned, then we'd have to be very deliberate, intentional, and strategic in ensuring that those resources get to the students that they were intended to serve. So
Absolutely.
We're trying to be very mindful of not only the budget, but we also do not want to diminish our opportunities for our students, obviously, and also ensure that we're not going to lay people off unnecessarily. So we are thinking about every possibility, including this movement of personnel to other funds. So while it shows a decrease, it would be a decrease in the general fund. That doesn't mean that it would not be moved creatively or not intentionally into LCAP, adhering to the LCAP rules, which are quite strict.
So I can appreciate that. And you know, yes, the LCAP rules are strict, but as evidenced by the fact that we've had carryover in the LCAP dollars for nearly ever since this LCFF has been instituted, I'm thinking that probably there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of, I mean, we've already been granted an extension on when we have to file our LCAP, so it's possible that there may be a little bit more flexibility. Certainly, I'm not advocating that we don't spend the dollars on the students who generate those dollars for us, but they're, you know, as evidenced by some of the other districts that have completely spent those dollars not as intended. I think we have tried very hard to spend them on our students, and I'd like to see that continued. But I appreciate the looking at it in that way, and would just ask that in the next set of documents that we see, that's a little clearer, that it's not, you know, we may be, you know, reducing it in the general fund on this case, but in fact, we're looking to use other dollars that would, you know, while it's a reduction of the general fund paying for 14 FTE, we're not laying off 14 FTE. So, and I also just want to echo what Mark said about how thoughtful people are really being around this process. Normally, we would have already known what our budget was going to be, and if we had to make these types of cuts, we would have been hashing this out in, you know, super line item by line item. And every day, every hour, every, you know, pronouncement that comes changes the calculation, changes the math for this. And so to me, you know, on the one hand, this, you know, we're obviously asking you for some more specificity as we're talking about these things, but we also know that, in fact, you know, we may or may not need this. We may or may not need more. We don't know what this next year is going to look like. We don't know how much, as to Mark's point, is it going to cost to reopen school with all of the precautions that we're going to need to take. So there's so much unknown, and I really want to thank everybody, but especially fiscal, for this, you know, nimbleness, if you will. No one wants to make these cuts, least of all the board. I appreciate the people who are emailing us, of course, but you know, these are decisions that we're going to have to make, and hopefully make in a way that when we get a state budget, whenever that is, and we know what, in fact, the ultimate analysis is, we'll be positioned to make those decisions that we are authorizing now a reality or not. If the news is really good and we don't have to do them, then we're in a position to be able to not do them. And in the meantime, we haven't decimated programs and we haven't trashed the things we have built here in this district. So thank you all very much. I know it's been a huge team effort, and I thank the community who has stepped up to provide a lot of input to the superintendent as well. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you, John. Valerie?
Yes, thank you. I too would like to thank all of our staff that's been involved in putting this together. I know it's been a lot of hard work, a lot of time, and I think it's very clear in how to read it and all of that. And I just want to say thank you for that. It's been great to see that. And I also want to just thank you too for all of the transparency around getting public input with our meetings and our workshops and thought exchange and the Budget Advisory Council. I think we've done an excellent job. Our district has done an excellent job in getting community feedback. So I thank you for that. And I thank the community for participating and giving the feedback. It's great to see people being involved and giving that feedback to us as in all the emails we're getting as well. So thank you for all of that. With questions in regards to the presentation, and Mark and Joan have already asked some of them that I had in mind, but I want to just a couple of things on number 22, the streamlining of the library services in K-12. Since there is a dollar amount attached to that, and it is listed here, and it says evaluate and reorganize, do we have any idea on what that means and what it would look like?
So we originally looked at it more narrowly, and the original iteration of that was looking narrowly at the elementary schools and kind of targeting somewhat of a reduction in the hours of service at the for the elementary group, and not really impacting the middle school and the high school. And as we met this weekend in executive cabinet and discussed it further, we kind of said we need to look at this more holistically as the K-12 and look at digital and how potentially COVID could impact not only K-12 but the middle school and high school, and potentially even looking at those services more critically, knowing that library is very important for the K-5 group. And so we really need to do more work on this, but so we've placed that as an aspirational kind of target, which could look at materials and books and other things that, looking at the total library budget and seeing what can we hold off for a couple of years. So we do have to do more work for it, but we did want to look at it and address it more holistically.
Okay.
And I would add that it gives us an opportunity to do a little bit of collaboration with the library staffs to see if there are ways they can identify to bring down the budget to that same dollar amount so that it doesn't get targeted towards people. So that was just there were a couple of items on the list that we modified the language because we thought there was probably a need for either additional clarity or more communication with other members of the team.
Okay, thank you. And I think getting their input on that would be a good idea. And then on number 23, there's no dollar amount there. The leverage cost savings is as a result of COVID restrictions. So would that only happen if there was a lever pulled on that, the contributions? It does mention athletics, after school enrichment, music programs. If you can clarify that a little bit.
So let me take that, Ahmed. The idea was that we had identified a particular program that we knew was not likely to be able to function in the first several months of school given the current restrictions. What we hadn't thought about, I guess, is that there's probably other programs just like it that may be in the same situation. So rather than identifying a specific program, let's look to try to capture the savings of programs that COVID will stop from moving forward in that bucket. So that's why we changed it from just the one program that had been called out to all similar programs, extracurriculars, athletics that we contribute to from the general fund, but may not be able to fully roll out given the restrictions. So we're going to look to leverage budgeted savings on budgeted expenses as opposed to just drawing cuts through programs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
And I think that's in line with what the board requested last time we met, which was the idea of any reductions we do it with the thought of being able to bring those things back as quickly as we could.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, and then 27 is the is our site text. Is that correct? On 27, and that one is worded a little bit differently as well. Correct? Am I correct on that? On 27 being related to the site tech specialists, and any further thought on that model, and since there is a dollar amount attached to that as well.
So I would just, Ahmed, you're on mute, but I'll take advantage of that. It's a similar story to the other one where we probably just need to have additional conversations with folks, and there may be savings across the district tech deployment, but go ahead, Ahmed.
No, and I was going to reiterate that we do want to look at that holistically. We think that there are systems that we can incorporate into the way we provide tech support, such as remote support, and better ways of utilizing our staff's time in utilizing new technology to help our technology devices and our staff out there. So we do feel that we can leverage efficiencies in that, both in systems and personnel. And we need to look at it holistically in a K-12 model. Okay.
I know it's important going forward with whatever model we choose to do in the fall that, the technology support's important. So, okay, thank you for that. Just one last comment, and this is on, 43B, and this is use of one-time sources of funding from property sales. I just will let you know that I'm not in favor of us selling property to use right now for our budget. And the reason, even if we have that flexibility to do that, I really would not like to see us entertain that thought. We have there is a new school on the horizon for us, but we also don't know what our future growth enrollment is such that, our demographers say we're going to need even additional schools. I think it would be, it wouldn't be a good idea to try to sell property to use that kind, and let go of property that we currently have. So I'm really not in favor of doing that. So that's just a comment of mine on that one. And with that, that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Trustee Yee?
I wanted to just reiterate what everybody said about appreciations. I know that a lot of work went into this, and I really appreciate how we've engaged the community. That's been a lot of extra work that the staff didn't actually have to do, but they went ahead and took the initiative and did that, and that's really great. I had a process question, first of all. So all of the reductions that are on here add up to a little bit more than 12 million. And isn't that the number we need to get to? So what is it that we're being asked of? I mean, is this a menu and we're choosing things to take off, or what is it that?
So great question. So the input that and direction, if there's direction, we will take, and working with the executive cabinet in the next day or so, in a very tight time, we're tightening this up further to get to that $11 million target.
Okay.
And in the report write-up for our annual budget adoption, you will see a very detailed list similar to this that will itemize those reductions that we will be part of our budget. So let's just take worst case. The governor's budget, the way it is with all his reductions, gets approved. The federal dollars, there's not a lot of flexibility. Then the only way that the county will approve our budget is to ensure that we have reductions built into the budget. So they will conditionally approve that budget and then waiting for us to actually implement the reductions. So that's the way it will be. It will be built into the budget. That $11 million, Tom will build it in as a placeholder, some in materials and supplies in the 4,000 and 5,000 areas, and others will be in salaries. And only once we're clarified from the state on what our revenues will be we then implemented, but that's the way we have to set it up. We have to set it up as though there's a worst case scenario then back off the pedal once we know what the actual cuts are.
That's why you're calling them levers.
Yeah.
Kind of. Okay, that makes it a little bit more clear.
Find a better word.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. So Mark had asked a little bit about the furloughs, and how we did it before was when we did furloughs, it was like everybody was off on the exact same day. Is that the thinking that we're going to do now? So you would pick 3 days during the school year and everybody would be off?
So what was proposed, it was 3 days for the APT. We have not yet met with CSEA. That's negotiation will take place on Monday. So there are also 3 days are being asked at the table there, not to share too much, but there's also a need with classified service that those days may not match up, say, with payroll staff that needs to prepare for payroll or other functions that classified may still be needed. So there may be some flexibility with an agreement with their supervisor to pick 3 days. To be able to create that flexibility. Again, if we are rigid with those 3 days, we may end up either hurting payroll or hurting another key function of the school district. But yes, in general, we are asking everyone to take those 3 days off at the same time.
So how would that affect the ROP program? Because our students, would go to other sites. I mean, it seems like, well, the students aren't furloughed. They could go to the other districts that don't have a furlough day and continue with their class that day. But any students that are coming to us from other districts for ROP would not be able to attend class those days that we have furloughs. I mean, is that, that's just how it would be?
As soon as we know what the plan is, we would collaborate with Julie Duncan, who's the superintendent with Tri-Valley ROP, to make sure that she understands where we're at. And we talked just yesterday, she understands that each district is having to come up with their own solutions, and they're working really hard to be as flexible as they possibly can, so that they can, kind of be in line with each of the 3 different districts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I'm glad that conversation is happening. Mark sort of asked this question too about like number of FTEs, and I know that Julio just said it's not really super clear, but I mean, I guess I just want to have this in people's minds and maybe my mind, but it just seems like if we didn't do a furlough day, or if we didn't do the 3 furlough days, that would result in us having to reduce something else or cut something else. And probably it would have to be FTEs, I'm guessing. So, and I think this is sort of what Mark asked, right? If we didn't do a furlough day, how many people would that impact, or how many FTEs would that impact in a layoff? And I guess it's the same thing if we're going to do a salary rollback, right? You're trading the salary rollback for FTEs. And so how many FTEs are we talking about? I mean, a ballpark.
But no, that's a good question, and there are some rules of thumb that I will provide you. And so typically an average certificated employee in the district, with all its costs, the loaded cost for the district is about $100,000. So when you look at like a $2 million reductions through that, that's 20 certificated. However, in the classified world, it could be many more. It could be 40, 50, classified, depending on, if, where they are, what kind of classified employee they are and how much they work. So it's not our classified, our full 1.0 FTE.
Right.
So the range and the amount of employees that it would take for $20 million could be, if it's certificated at 20, but it could be 30 to 40 if you're looking at classified.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good answer, Julio? I think you wanted to jump in there as well.
Yes, I mean, that's a great answer. We just, like David said, we just don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And we do not know how much we are going to be deficient in funds depending on when the budget comes out. And then what we are attempting to do is to ensure that our educational program is intact, that we do not lay off our personnel, and that we have a balanced budget. And it's a grand Sudoku trying to produce a plan with all of these unknown factors. So it's hard to say how much FTE we're looking at, but what would help is if we did have the furlough days, that amount of money would assist us in the layoff area, as well as in other programs. But primarily we're 85% personnel. So any bit would be an assistance into preventing releasing our staff.
Okay.
And one of the other reasons why furloughs are a little bit more attractive at this point in the game is that we have the ability to toggle them on and toggle them off if additional funds come from the federal government. Whereas if we let people go, it's difficult to bring those same people back.
Right.
And so it gives us a little bit more flexibility, and it keeps the focus on maintaining our staff. Yes, it does have a pain point, obviously, for everybody, because everybody would share in it. But if those dollars do arrive, we can easily, let's say that we get new money. There's a furlough day that's taken in October, and in December, all of a sudden new money comes. We wouldn't necessarily have to do the additional furlough days in the rest of the year. And so it does give us, the agreement should be structured in such a way that we can toggle it on, toggle it off based on that, the federal funds.
Yeah, I mean, that does seem like that gives us the most amount of flexibility depending on what comes in or doesn't. So we did get, a significant amount of emails today, and kind of the message was the same thing. No furloughs. And, so I wanted people to really understand what the furloughs really mean. And then we got a lot of the emails asked for, don't reduce our salary by 1.6%. I'm not really sure where the 1.6% is. What are they talking about? Because in the presentation here, it's either 1% or 1.5%.
So the 1.6% is, well, I didn't do the math personally, but it's probably the net effect of 3 days of furlough on a 100% salary. So that's my guess. But there is no, as you noted in the presentation, there is no direct recommendation for salary reduction. We pulled that off the table. We didn't want to go there. It's still an option if the board wants to go there instead of the other, but we did not make that recommendation to you. The other thing is that we've tried to structure the recommendation for furloughs so that it doesn't impact student learning. And so it's non-student days for the teachers. And so it does not reduce services to students.
Okay. And
if I may add as well.
Go ahead.
So there is no recommendation for a salary reduction per se, as David indicated. It's not a recommendation unless the board chooses to go in that direction. And it's not a unilateral implementation. There has to be an agreement by the associations to engage in the furlough days. Our ask is that if we engage in furlough days, it will limit the impact in layoffs in the future. It will be able to lay off this summer or make other reductions. And again, it's a shared impact across the school district, as it would also impact management. And also the ask is for CSEA. So there is no recommendation to the board to reduce salaries by 1.6%. There is a recommendation, if we are able to get an agreement with our associations, to have 3 furlough days, again, just for 1 year, 2021, in hopes of staying off some of these layoffs.
And again, only if needed.
Only if
Right.
needed. So it is contingency language. Should we receive funding, and should the federal government send the money and the state government then send us the money, then we will then not implement those days. So it is what we call contingency language. Yes.
Yeah, and
Do
then
we have more questions?
Ahmed, to say
yeah.
something?
yeah, I wanted to just in terms of the math, the way I think some of the staff looked at it, because those were mostly coming for certificated. They work 185 days. So when you take 3 days out, that translates to about a 1.6% because of the per diem, right? That percentage would vary depending on how many work days and how many hours you work, right? So that's just a perspective for the 185-day employees.
Okay, that's really helpful. So what, so a couple of other things. In the pie chart, you list salary and benefits. And I just want people to understand what we're talking about when we say benefits. Just to, just so that people understand that.
So in benefits includes all of the statutory requirements. So your typical federal statutories and any state statutories, workers' comp is included in there. The largest portion being our contribution to the STIRS pension program and the PERS pension program. And then our classified employees also receive healthcare benefits. So all of those items total the benefits portion of that we contribute to an employee.
Okay, that's good clarification for anybody who wanted to know that. And then I was just wondering about, wait, let me see what else. Two things that we had kind of mentioned before, and I don't know, maybe you don't have the calculation, but offering that early retirement, because that would be a little bit of a savings. And then also last time during the recession, we also did a thing where we closed the district office like every other Friday or something. Basically, those were the furlough days. So I don't know if you guys played around with that at all.
I can provide you some insight into the early, to the retirement incentive. We did engage with PARS, which is a retirement incentive. They kind of manage retirement accounts for government agencies, and so we did look at that. We did do analysis, and the way those incentives would work is you offer that incentive to your employees. And then there's different options within that they can choose, right? And then there would be a cost for the district. The district would have to pay an upfront cost, which could be spread over a 5-year period. And then the savings would come to the district in that typically your retirees that are in the higher end take those incentives and retire earlier than they would have planned. And then the district would either not hire back some of those positions. So it really requires, it works well when there is both an incentive and a reduction plan. And then the employees that we do hire back typically are in the lower end of the salaries positions. And so that would provide the district with a net savings in terms of dollars, or even maybe cost neutral. But I think the other thing is that it would provide the staff that are closer to retirement to retire, and the staff that are earlier in their career to stay on, which is different than the usual layoff process where the staff that don't want to stop working have to then be the ones who are released.
Right. Okay. That's good
We're
clarification.
going to do, we looked at PARS. There are other retirement firms out there that do this. So we're going to look at that, and STRS also has its own program. So we're going to look at that analysis in the months to come, because you have to really offer those programs early on so people can start planning for it and take advantage.
Mm-hmm.
If I could add, as far as, and I think Trustee Miller raised a question about the golden handshake.
Right.
Those need to be, if the offer for the incentive is an improved offer for retirement, one of the asks that usually is made is that if there is a institutionalized CBA golden handshake, is that be suspended in order for the improved offer of that retirement incentive to be instituted, if that makes sense. So it behooves our associations to suspend the golden handshake or remove the golden handshake in lieu of this better, more improved plan. That tends to be what happens, and that would apply also to management as well as our associations. So when it's listed as a possibility to negotiate that golden handshake out, it may be in conjunction with this better offer of an incentive retirement plan.
Okay. And then what about for anybody who's not represented? How would it work, the golden handshake?
So the golden handshake currently only applies to those who are represented with APT and CSEA, as they have those. Management is in the AR. So right now, those who are not in position would be hourly employees, would normally not qualify for that retirement. So we can discuss that further with the board if there's an interest of how to do that. But currently, the only golden handshakes are for management as well as those represented by APT and CSEA.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then I think that's it. Yep, that's it.
Yeah, I have some questions and some comments. First of all, just thank you to everyone who's put in a ton of time on this. It's very well done, very clear. Moving through my comments, when we look at the text, I'm speaking from a school point of view. They are very valuable, and with all our students having computers now, I would hate to somehow reduce the amount of service that our schools could get. I just think that they're busy all day long. Now, if there's another way to do that, I certainly think we can listen to that, but I know that they're really in demand. If you talk to your principals, their tech is their right-hand person. Second, Ahmed, I want to just to clear some air here and be transparent a little bit. What percentage, because we're going to get these questions, what percentage of management do we have in the district?
They're a great question. That will be part of the budget report, and we worked with Kathy and Tom to pull that. We have in the budget that we're developing about 1,250 FTE, full-time equivalent staff. Now there's actually more bodies because not all our staff are full-time, but of that number, only about 5.8% of our staff are management, somewhere around 60 certificated and about 14, 15 classified management. And if you compare management to staff ratios in any other industry, you have much higher ratios. And it is the challenge of education and having one principal with a couple of VPs and coordinators to manage anywhere from 70 to a couple hundred employees at a high school. I mean, that is truly the challenge of education. And so those ratios are very much in a line and are probably on the lower end when compared to other school districts.
Another question I always have thrown up to me, quite frankly, is, well, the district has a large reserve or a cash reserve for rainy days. is there anything like that? I know that our, it looked like our reserve would be down to a little more than 4% this year, and then possibly 3% 21, 22.
Great. No, that's a great question. Sometimes when you look at our balance in terms of what is, cash available to what is to what is actually available for the district to use, those are two different numbers, and because of the concept of restricted dollars. And so the district receives restricted dollars, both in terms of, let's say, local donations and grants, federal grants and federal programs, as well as state programs and grants. And so those monies are not available while they sit in our bank account. They're not available for us to just utilize them. And so you have to remove those dollars out of our available dollars. And so what you see reported, I believe on page, go back to the page numbers, on the proposed budget, page 11, in terms of the amount of general fund reserves remaining, that's what's available in terms of flexible dollars. In addition, when you look at all our accounts, we do have other funds, and those funds tend to be restricted. So we have, a cafeteria program. It will have dollars in it, but those monies are only meant for our food service program. They buy food, they have staff. We have an adult education program that has its own fund. We have a bond program, and so on and so forth. And so each of those dollars exist for the purposes that are set forth, and you can't commingle these dollars. And so the concept of restricted dollars and the concept of funds is really critical to understanding what's the available cash for our general fund purposes.
Okay. Just another comment. I was pleased to see K-12 library, because oftentimes the reduction in library services are the elementary takes the brunt. They just go from there. So I was pleased to hear you say that you're looking at all K-12 library before you make a cut. I would hope that would remain. Another question I have: who makes the determination of what lever gets toggled back on or not?
It's a good question. Is at the end of the day, that resides with the board of directors and the board of trustees. Right. And so that's why we're seeking this input and this direction, and no action will be taken until that is provided.
Will you come next week with a suggested list of what, after you negotiate with the unions, of course, and everything, these look like are the levers that could be toggled back on? Or?
Yeah, we will put into the budget, based on the input we received today, based on some of the negotiations that are ongoing, what those reductions will look like in the budget. However, we will probably be back again having this discussion once the budget is finalized and enacted at the state, and say, okay, we now have a budget that has X amount of dollars of revenue, and we believe the level of reductions is, let's say, $5 million, right? We look at our list and we discuss that with the board and then move from there. So there is a couple of more steps to the actual implementation of those reductions.
And then you talked about the specialists, Julio. If we have distance learning and we have students that are not attending school, or if we do some type of hybrid, who's in, some are out, then they come in, could the specialists then do Zoom to more than a class of 30 or 45?
They could. Our intentions are that we maintain the collective bargaining agreement caseloads, so that we are ensuring that we are not in violation of that number. Mm-hmm. So we are attempting to maintain that. Now, that said, with the specialists, depending on the model, specialists may be moved into vacant positions. They may be moved into assisting our teachers with remote teaching and learning. So there's a different way of using them depending on what the model is. but our intentions are not to go beyond the collective bargaining agreement's caseload numbers for any section, for any class that we have. That said, we have to be creative in our reductions. So what will be useful is this concept of overflow. There are a percentage of our students in elementary school who have indicated, not yet fully fleshed out, but a good number, maybe 10% or less or so, that want to be virtually for next school year for a variety of reasons. So those students may be from Hearst, Fairlands, Moore. So there will be a teacher that will be teaching them in a virtual world, which will lessen that overflow concept because they won't physically be at those schools. They'll still more than likely be students of record of those schools, but the instruction will be virtual, which will assist in this overflow concept. And that class may be taught by a specialist or may be taught by a regular teacher. Again, we'll still remain that the number of students within that virtual classroom or the mixed model or fully in school abide by that contractual caseload number.
Okay. And then where does the mariachi program fit into all this? As far
So
as
Steve, the mariachi program was on, I'm not looking at the presentation. Which line was it, Ahmad?
It was, give me a second. It was a line.
It's not there anymore.
It
was a part of line
23, I think.
23. And you'll remember that a little while ago, I talked about how we had looked at, rather than a particular program, we looked at leveraging COVID-related savings across programs that were restricted because of the limitations from the health department. So rather than identifying a program, there's a bucket number that we anticipate we might be able to save across all those programs.
but
And it's
we're
not, the intent was never to eliminate the program or get rid of, change it up, make it smaller. It was simply, we knew at the time when we were having these conversations that the restrictions we were facing would make starting that program at the beginning of the year difficult.
I see.
And so if it didn't get to start until the winter time or whenever they released the restrictions, that whatever was saved between the start of the year and that point at the time when we could restart it would be leveraged as savings. But then in further conversations, we realized that there were a lot of other programs that might likely be in that same space. So let's take out the name and just look across all of those programs for
that could be
savings.
like coaches. There's no sports, or
Could be a lot of different
Could be,
things, Steve.
yeah.
And that's why we just decided to take off any title and just look to have a bucket for the savings.
Okay.
And I think that was a good idea. And it's really unfortunate that people didn't ask questions or try to understand that, because nowhere did we ever say that mariachi was going away. We just knew.
It said suspend, and we're moving so fast. Yeah, but we're I get it. We're moving so fast. We put things in a PowerPoint so that we can have conversations about them. People look at the PowerPoint and they make decisions based on what they read on that piece of paper. They're not all involved in the other conversations. So to a degree, nobody likes what's going on, right? Everybody's going to be affected by this. And as Joan said earlier, none of us want to make any of these cuts. We wanted to go continue with all the programs that have been made Pleasanton special for a long time. And so these are not things that we're interested in or excited about. These are horrific cuts that are being forced upon us, and we're trying to figure out a way to do it that's collaborative with our community, collaborative with the associations, and has the full support of the board, and do it in such a way, great guidance from the board, to do it in such a way that we can roll down programs when we need to roll them down, but roll them back up as the dollars come back into the district. So that's all I would say.
I know we're not, tonight's agenda is not about the reopening of school and what it's going to look like, but people have to understand, if they're reading the news at all, choir, music, sports, there's just a whole host of things that we all hold dear that are going to be affected by the rules under which this pandemic has forced us to live. So yeah, it was an unfortunate, like you said, we're moving so fast on these things. Some of the language that we're using, might be misinterpreted, or we're not as clear as we could be or should be. But yeah.
But I would kind of, going back to what you were saying, Jamie, I'm supportive of the concept that, hey, let's pick up the phone and have a conversation about things so that we can have a chance to explain our thinking and even take your input and readjust our thinking. So, let's assume positive intent in the process, engaging conversations, even if they're hard, as we walk this thing forward.
And my one last comment would be, and it looks like the district is doing that, of course, or the recommendations are coming, is that everyone shares in this. By sharing, I mean, if you have to reduce, all of us are reducing. So it's not anyone in particular. And I think people may not like it, but when you share, that's just the way it is. And as you said, we're mandated by certain things from the government, by the state. This is what you're getting, and we have to come up with a budget. And that's what reality is. So no further comments.
I had actually, Steve, I had just two more quick things.
Okay.
So when Julio was talking about about 10% of our elementary kids, are thinking they want to do virtual. So let's just say they choose virtual next school year, and then the following school year, the pandemic is totally gone, it goes away, and they want to go back to their home school. Are they going to be able to do that? Like, does anybody give up their spot at their home school? And maybe this is an Ed question. But.
So let me take that, Julio.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is we surveyed parents to try to get an understanding of where parents were at with regards to their comfort level of re-engaging with school if schools are reopened. And we found that there was a group of people that were interested in staying home longer. Even if it's okay to let the school open up, I'm still not comfortable with that. So we wanted to create a few options for them. One of them is just an independent study program, which would kind of like be a district supported homeschooling program for those, especially younger kids, because a virtual program is not going to work for really young kids. I know that there are charter schools that say they can do it. I've lived that world. I don't think it's the best thing for kids, especially it's kids that are trying to learn how to read. So other people can have other opinions. That just happens to be mine. And so we need to know who these families are, and we need to have conversations with the families, each one of them individually, to determine really what's best for that child and what they're looking for. There may be a group of parents that really want to pursue an online learning experience. We can build that. They don't have to leave our district to go find that somewhere else. If that's a service that our community values, then we as an educational institution should provide that service, because that's what our customer base is asking for. So we want to do that, but we also want to do it right. And so everything's not going to be beautiful, if you know what I mean, in this quick of an implementation. So I want to talk to those parents so that we can be sure that we're being smart about that transition, and that we're not flipping back and forth between instructional models, because that's not good for anybody. It's not good for the classroom, it's not good for the student, and it's frankly not good for the family. And so we want to make sure that we're having thoughtful conversations with our families, engaging with our teachers in the development process. Dr. Woodward and her team did task force. I think there's 120 people that are working on those different plans, and they're working hard. I mean, we had these sessions to plan it, and then you go back the next time and they've done three more pages, after the session ended. And so the teachers and the classified staff and the managers who are working on that task force are taking it incredibly seriously. They're raising the concerns that they have, and some of them include about a virtual school. And we're trying to address those things as best as we can, because we don't want this to be, any of those programs to be a standalone separate program for our students. There are kids, there are families. We want them to be taught by our teachers and deliver the same level of rigor that any parent or any student would get at any other school in the district, regardless of whether or not it's a virtual application, or we're kind of calling it a flex academy, or it's an independent study program. And of course, across the whole district, if we're going back and forth between, in a hybrid world between distance learning and on-campus learning based on the guidance of the Public Health Department. So Dr. Woodward, do you want to?
Do we need a motion to extend the meeting?
I don't think so. It's a workshop.
Okay, so it's because it had an end.
I could be
end time.
wrong, but
There's no reason why you can't vote to extend it if you want to, but I don't think that the same rule applies in the special board.
And it only applies, I believe, it is specific
10
in our
o'clock.
bylaws at 10 o'clock. So I think
Yeah.
we're,
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay.
So you can't go
I
past
was
10.
going, oh no, are we at 10 o'clock?
I'm like looking at my clock going, it's not, is it, did
Can't
we
be
have
10 yet.
time change I didn't know about?
If I could kind of stop the board comments and questions, I'd like to give public comments and questions, then come back to the board.
Okay, because I do have one more question, but it can wait.
Okay. Patrick, do we have anybody who would like to speak?
Yes, Steve, thank you. Our first public commenter will be Paul Nozika, followed by Devansh Pandy, and then Michelle Verkylen.
How many do we have? Patrick, about how many do we have?
We have 5.
Okay, I can handle that.
President Maher, would it be 3 minutes or 2 minutes?
Well, I'd say 2 minutes. Let's stay with it. That's what we're going with now.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. Some of what I will share in regard to the benefits of providing on-school site tech support was provided via email sent to the trustees. This will be more anecdotal. My name is Paul Nozika. I'm the site tech at Harvest Park. My wife teaches and my children both attend school in the district. I started in higher education nearly 25 years ago. After establishing the web services unit at 2 CSU campuses, I transitioned into K-12 space, working for other districts before arriving at Pleasanton, one of which had a centralized tech support model. I can say with confidence that if supporting classroom instruction is a priority, then the current model with site tech support available at individual schools is a better option. As an on-site tech, I'm able to provide immediate response time to both staff and students, the latter of which are ensured to be sent home with a working device. This disappears in a centralized paradigm. With an on-site tech, there is also an ephemeral benefit existing for teachers and staff by simply knowing there is a subject matter expert available at any time, whatever the question. Also, when teachers are supported by an on-site tech, there's less things they need to worry about, allowing them to focus more on instruction and the students. When considering school site technology, there are desktops, PA systems, digital signs, AV systems, classroom backup devices, printers, Project Lead the Way, media classes, computer labs, project-specific software, inventory, asset tracking, setup, teardown, and after-school activities that have technology needs. All of these things don't only benefit from having on-site support, they become jeopardized when that level of support doesn't exist. Last, each of the current site techs are at their respective sites because they either chose to be or applied for a position at that specific school. None of them applied to work in a position that exists in a centralized support model, and I think none believe moving in this direction to be beneficial over the long term. I know these are hard decisions. I appreciate everyone and all your hard work. I strongly urge you to oppose any line item to centralize the site technology specialists here in Pleasanton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, next we'll have Devansh Pandy, followed by Michelle Verkylen, and then Maria White.
Hello, I'm Devansh. I'm a student going into Foothill High School next year. First, I wanted to commend all of the board members and all of the administration for all of their work on all of this. You guys have done a tremendous job going over all the details. So I just wanted to put some input of mine into this. First, again, I want to emphasize personnel reductions should be minimized as much as possible, especially of teachers and other important school staff, because they are vital to the PUSD community. Second of all, as much as possible, we should try to avoid reducing electives, because I know electives are incredibly important to me as well as all of my fellow students. And electives make the school what they are. They give personality, and they're extremely important to student learning. On that line, please don't suspend music or attempt not to cut any funding for the music program as well as the world language program if possible. Instead, you should try to cut funding in district growth and development projects that can wait for 2 years as much as possible. And finally, I would strongly advise and request that you guys include students in your advisory committees like the Superintendent Advisory Committee, because students are the most directly affected members of the community, and their voice should be heard too. Thank you.
Thank you, Devnesh.
All right, next we have Michelle Verkalen, followed by Maria White, and finally Sam Weaver.
Good evening, President Maher, members of the board, Dr. Haglund, members of the cabinet, and our community. I am Michelle Verkalen, the president of the Association of Pleasanton Teachers. We have been designated as essential workers. That means the state has determined that what we do is essential. Our legislature has put forth a budget that is supportive of education and underscores the importance of what we do. APT appreciates all the work that has gone into determining the myriad of ways that our budget can address the current economic uncertainty. To make cuts to our educators and support staff, whether in the form of layoffs or furloughs or directly to our salaries, is not aligned with the message of the state and does not put our students first. Investing in Pleasanton staff is investing in Pleasanton students. Our students deserve fully staffed schools and the opportunity to receive an equitable education. Putting students first means no furlough days for staff. In previous study sessions, many options to avoid cuts that affect our students have been explored. The state has set up financial paths so that our essential workers can do their jobs. It is important that these are the paths taken to balance our budget. APT asks these questions. Have all possibilities been exhausted before cuts to our students via educators are being considered? Have we ensured that only essential expenditures are occurring? Has consolidation been implemented where it can be? Have each of our monetary buckets been combed through for the prospects that they present? We know the state budget is not yet solidified. We know we are waiting to hear on further federal support. Let's not make decisions that affect our staff and students without all the facts. We do not want our students hurt because Pleasanton students deserve the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and next we have Maria White and finally Sam Weaver.
Good evening, Pleasanton board members, Superintendent Haglund, and all other administration that has joined us tonight. I implore you to remember that investing in Pleasanton staff is investing in Pleasanton students. Furlough days are pay cuts, just dressed up with a fancy new term. They are not days off. They are forced days of no work, no pay. The district is essentially proposing a 1.6% pay cut via 3 furlough days, which also means that they are proposing a cut to our students' education. This is on top of already not providing a regular cost of living increase each year. Pleasanton students deserve fully staffed schools and the opportunity to receive an equitable education compared to the surrounding districts. Trustee Yee, you have previously expressed concern that if we don't take care of our staff, they will be poached by neighboring districts. Your words of investing in our staff is investing in our students has stuck in my head ever since. Despite what Mr. Hernandez has stated during this meeting, there is an impact to both teachers and students with furlough days. Recommending the furlough days be taken on teacher work days means that teachers will not have work days. So when will grading and report cards be done? When will there be conferences? When will there be professional development? Again, furlough days means 3 less days of education for our students and 3 days less pay for the teachers. Please consider other options outside of taking away money from your teachers and educational days from your students, because I think we all agree, Pleasanton students deserve the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and finally, Sam Weaver.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, that's the wrong photo, but that's okay. My name is Sam Weaver. I'm a longtime Pleasanton resident, moved here in 1988. I've been teaching at Amador Valley for the past 13 plus years. And I'm also a parent of 2 children in the district. I understand, and my wife's also a teacher. I think better than anyone sometimes, understand what it is that makes Pleasanton such a special place for such a long time, to reference Dr. Haglund's words, right? And investing in Pleasanton staff is that investment in Pleasanton students. So by proposing a 1.6% pay cut for all staff is cutting our students' education, right? Students deserve fully staffed schools and the opportunity to receive an equitable education. Our students deserve the best. I'm here because of my students. I'm here because of my children. And putting students first means no furlough days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, no further comments, Pat? Patrick, no further comments? Hearing none.
President Maher, that is all of our public comments.
Okay, thank you. Okay, board, any more additional comments or questions? Jamie, you had one, I think.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Ahmad, because I just realized that the state actually has a separate reserve account for public schools. I don't really know how much is in it, and how does that work? I mean, how do we get that money, and is it even very much?
Good question. There's a rainy day fund which the state has built outside of the school district Prop 98. That is where the majority of the state's reserve and rainy day fund, they can only spend half of it in a fiscal year. And I think that is the governor's proposal, is to take as much out of that rainy day fund for the current year, and a large proportion of that is coming to school districts. The reserve that resides in the school district budget, or maybe the Prop 98 side, is small right now. I think it's about, somewhere to $400 to $500 million, and I think he and the legislature are looking at that, but it's not as large as the rainy day fund.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Joan, Mark, Valerie? Ahmed, you might have answered this. I have one question. When do you anticipate that we'd have to start pulling the levers?
Great question. I anticipate that once we have clarity in the enacted budget, which should be either end of June or early July, we would then update our budget model and then look at the deficit and the reductions that we would be facing based on that information, and then to bring that forth back to the board before we proceed on actually pulling those levers. And some of those levers will take time because it's not going to be an instant implementation. Other ones we have to move pretty quickly on, right, as well.
Can we do partial levers if we needed to, if we received money? Is that possible, or it's all or nothing?
Correct. No, I anticipate that once we see the final budget and the actual dollars that we receive, that we're going to have discussions on the level of which those reductions would need to occur. So, for example, we could look at some of the reductions that are proposed and pull them back. So that's a process that's going to occur. It's not an all or nothing. It's going to be a gradation of reductions.
So we still need more information, of course.
We need more information, and we'll be back having those discussions.
Hey,
So
Steve,
I think one thing I want to clarify, if I can, on your answer, not that it was everything wrong with it. I just want to add some color to it. The budget you're going to look at next week is going to look like all the levers are pulled, because we have to get to that $11 million number. But you need to understand that as we go into July and new information comes, we'll be able to flip those levers back into the opposition. But don't expect that next week you're going to see some modified budget, because we don't anticipate we'll have that information in time to make changes. And if I'm wrong on that, Ahmed, please correct.
That's
you're 100% correct. We basically have are ready to finish up the budget and the write-up. There's literally no more time in terms of what we have to do as staff to getting this budget to publication on 5 o'clock on Monday. And I don't foresee the governor being able and the legislature resolving their issues. And even if in a miracle they did, it would not provide us enough time to make the needed adjustments. It's just a matter.
Can we move forward, Ahmed, with our plan, even though it's not in, the levers aren't pulled yet, but with items that aren't negotiated yet? Or do we have to have negotiations settled on certain items before we move forward?
So I know Julio wants to talk, but before he does, yeah, I mean, there are items in the budget in terms of non-personnel items in terms of, we've indicated that, we're going to have less conferences and, we're going to do less, we're going to delay the purchase of our book adoptions. And definitely those we'll be implementing right away. We're not going to, suddenly say, oh, we got more money, we're going to go buy the books tomorrow, right? I mean, those are the smart ones that we are going to implement. And there are other ones that, as previously discussed with the board, that make a lot of good operational and fiscal sense in the long term. And you have to remember is that even if we get some additional dollars from the federal government, or if the state comes up with more dollars, most likely those are going to be one-time in nature, meaning that the out-year reductions are going to be still necessary, and we still have to look at smart use of our dollars. And so, yes, there are reductions in there that aren't going to require layoffs, that aren't going to impact salaries that the district should still proceed on.
Good, thank you.
I wanted to add something too, because this is, Jamie and Valerie are both our delegates to CSBA, and they may have a little bit more color to add to this. But the difference this time around is that we have a governor that we can't predict. Governor Brown was very predictable. And, you knew where he stood. He didn't change his mind very much from one, week to the next in this matter. The legislature, the check on them was that they had to pass a budget by a certain deadline. That was met. They did that. So from their point of view, they're going to get paid, and they've done their duty. This governor, I don't have an insight into what he's going to do. He literally could veto the whole thing and say, you didn't balance this budget. You didn't, you're betting on money that we have no idea whether we're going to receive, and send it back. We could be back. I don't want to think about it this way, but we could be back to the days when, remember, we got a budget in October, for God's sakes, as late as October. And so I'm not trying to, the sky is falling, but I just need people to understand that not only will we not, even if they do settle, as Ahmad mentioned, we're going to have to move forward and pass our budget, because that's what our legal requirement is, by June 30th. But it's possible that we're not going to have a state budget even by June 30th. It's possible it's going to take them much longer to hammer out in negotiation what they're going to ultimately come up with, and that he's willing to sign. I don't know.
Well, I've been sort of following this kind of closely. So they did agree, right? The legislature and the governor did agree basically on everything. Where they don't agree is if we don't get the federal money. Right? I mean, the legislature is not interested in giving education less money or cutting services or programs to, the most neediest of residents in our state. But if they don't get the federal money, then that's where who knows what Newsom's going to do. That's really where the rub is, because that's where they don't agree. So
I think there's a couple of other places where there's disagreement that are fairly significant. One being the how the federal dollars are allocated, whether it's through the LCAP formula or simply to the concentration grant. So there are still there's some negotiating that needs to be done. And that one has a big impact on us, how they determine to roll that one out. So, we have to, I tell my boys, you hope for the best, you plan for the worst, and you take what you get. I mean, you can't always predict exactly the way things are going to turn out, but always be prepared to ride the rougher wave. Don't think that it's just going to be smooth, because you'll end up getting your head crashed into the sand. So we have to function in the same way. We've got to plan for the worst case scenario with knowledge that there will likely be some form of relief, but an inability to actually gauge what that relief will look like and when it will come. The other trigger that hasn't been determined completely yet is whether or not there's going to be the ability to toggle on the July layoff window. There's still discussions about that. So there's a whole lot of things that are still on the table that we may have available to us or we may not have available to us.
Any more questions or comments?
Does the staff have, do they sort of know what direction we're going? Did we give them enough, or do we need to give a final comment?
Are you okay, Ahmed? Do you know what you need to do?
I feel working with the executive cabinet and the superintendent, we will be able to provide the board with kind of a refined version of our plan today.
Yeah, you guys have all shared some things that you're comfortable with and some things that you're not. So we'll go back and look at those things as we try to get this wrapped up this week.
Okay. That being said, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay healthy.